Okay, welcome to this meeting of the decision session for the Executive Member for Finance and Performance on Monday, the 18th of January. Having not a lot of attention to my decision sessions before, I'm feeling something like a cross between Graham Norton and Jonathan Ross, as I'm joined by multiple guests with me today. I have Councillor Andrew Waller, who is the Executive Member for the Economy, and Councillor Denise Craghill, who is the Executive Member for Housing and Safer Neighbourhoods, who will be joining me for various agenda items throughout the course of the meeting. So item 1 on the agenda is declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest?
Not that aren't already on the register.
Okay, item number 2 is the minutes. So we have 2 sets of minutes. The first meeting is on the 3rd of December. Councillor Craghill, I believe you were there as well. Are you happy with those as a correct record?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
I am as well. And then the second minutes are from the 14th of December, which was just myself, and I'm happy to agree those as a correct record and look forward to signing the piles and piles of paper when I get into West offices of all the remote meetings we've had. Item number 3 is public participation. We have had notice of 2 members of the public registered to speak. Each member of the public has 3 minutes, and then after that you'll be asked to leave the meeting and are free to watch on the webcast outside. So the first public speaker I have is a Mr. Martin Spencer, who's here to talk to us about item 6 on the agenda, the urgent item. Are you there, Mr. Spencer?
Yes, I'm here. Are you hearing me?
I'm hearing you loud and clear. Thank you very much. You have approximately 3 minutes, given we only have 2 speakers. I'll have a certain amount of leeway with that one. So if you can start to speak whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you. York's business community is here to help CYC to get vital grant assistance to the maximum number of York's independent traders. And we are truly grateful for the efforts made by CYC to adjust the criteria for ARG grants to include more non-residents who trade on the shambles market. Another fine example of how York looks after its wealth of loyal businesses in an inclusive and enlightened manner. Please contact us if any further information is needed to resolve issues in any individual applications for ARG grants going forward. We strongly support the spirit of the amendment proposed in point 11 of Agenda Supplement 2. In specific reference to market traders, we do have some suggestions to consider. We think that online trade on the internet should not be counted when assessing whether the business trades at least 75% in York. Only traditional face-to-face physical retail turnover should be included in what is a calculation based upon physical location. Newly established traders have missed out on many financial help schemes from the national government. And if they cannot survive now, York will miss out on their contribution to our city and its culture in the future. So, can we make sure that all traders can apply for ARG grants, even if they are relatively new arrivals? The offer to backdate applications to include the November 2020 lockdown mentioned in point 6 should also be extended to market traders when they now become eligible for ARG grants due to these proposed changes. Point 6 also correctly highlights the need for crystal clear messaging to ensure that all businesses are fully aware of ARG grants and the amendments made to them. So, could the market trading sector be specifically mentioned in all information going forward? Though the proposed changes will help the majority of traders to get much needed grants, there will still be a minority who are not eligible. To cover such rare anomalies, could the sharing of information and cooperation between councils be speeded up and improved? And can we assist you in doing this? Even with these amendments, the combined grants for the shambles market's trading community will only be a small percentage of the total ARG budget. But the diversity of offerings they add to the overall draw of our city will be a huge contribution to our shared recovery and continued success. Truly a great return from money very wisely invested. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spencer. So your comments will be noted when we come to that agenda item, and you're welcome to leave now and to watch the rest of the meeting online. Our second speaker also on item 6 is Mr. Kevin Toohey. Are you here, Mr. Toohey?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can do, thank you very much.
Lovely.
as with the last speaker, you have approximately 3 minutes, give or take.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. We would like to thank the executive member for reviewing the additional restrictions grant. We appreciate the extra work undertaken to ensure the deserving working people situated in York are looked after in these unprecedented times. This is hopefully welcoming news for York Shambles market traders who have seen their livelihoods put on hold, as of most of the rest of the country. We would hope, therefore, that the Shambles market traders are included in the recommendation for ARG assistance and that this help is distributed as quickly as possible. For those unable to trade, it is a hard slog to make ends meet. Please let me highlight a few relevant issues. The deadline for Hmrc contribution is fast approaching on the 31st of January, and these ARG lifelines would help a large cohort to stay afloat for the future. Coupled with this, as you all know, is the constant requirement to pay bills. While some at least had a temporary 3-month holiday period for bills back in April, nevertheless, such as council tax and mortgages now need to be repaid in full. Some traders I know are finding it difficult to make ends meet in terms of feeding families and balancing their weekly budgets. Savings are being depleted, and this financial help proposed would therefore be greatly appreciated for the here and now to help protect families and their well-being. Also, it would enable them to be in a more favourable position to invest in stock for the future when allowed to trade, and to these ends to further ensure their businesses do not fold. York traders, as you know, pay City of York Council on a daily basis to trade in the place they love. It is a privilege to trade in York. Therefore, as you know, they invest substantial amounts of revenue year in, year out for this opportunity. Shambles market traders would like to contribute to trade when safely allowed to do so again in the future. They feel that they contribute in both financial and social means to the upkeep of the city. Excess money they earn in good times has been ploughed back into the city centre as a whole. For example, they shop in such places as Stonegate, bring relatives to the Minster, and in the past have enjoyed nights out dining in York. So to be clear, we the traders invest in our city in multiple ways and not merely the 3 examples given. Local people too come to rely on the specialised and personable service we offer, as well as the social interaction, which is a crucial aspect to their daily lives as well as ours. Now in our hour of need, we ask that a fraction of the funds we have paid over the years is released back to help maintain both livelihoods and the realisation in the future we will continue to invest in our city. Shambles market traders look forward to helping the economic recovery of the City of York. We feel that we can help provide a crucial service to the tourist and local industries when they return. York has prided itself on their array of independent traders, and this sector will be crucial to provide diversity and value for all returning customers. Trader representatives are now pursuing closer working ties with such as Make It York, York Bid, and York Retail Forum. In doing so, we recognise that we are not a separate entity working in isolation, but rather a local and tourist destination in our own right, forever at the heart of the wonderful City of York. Thank you very much for your valued time.
Thank you, Mr. Toohey. And again, your comments will be noted when we discuss the relevant agenda item. And you're welcome to leave us now, and you're more than welcome to watch us on the webcast. I'll now move on. We're going to change the agenda slightly, given the nature of the public speakers, and bring item number 6, urgent business, the additional restrictions grant, forward at the beginning. So I'll hand over to Tracy Carter to introduce herself and introduce the item.
Thanks very much, Chair. My name is Tracy Carter and I'm the Interim Director of Place responsible for economic development, and presenting the report today as an urgent item due to the recent announcement of an extension to the additional restrictions grant provisions that were first presented to you in a paper on the 12th of November. So this report is an update on progress on distributing those funds, but it also reviews the eligibility criteria to ensure that more businesses who do not benefit from other kinds of grant support are eligible for the grant. So having had a fairly good success in distributing the first round of grants, we wanted to make sure that any gaps that had been unwittingly created in that scheme were addressed as part of this one. So the original funding for the additional restrictions grants was £4,212,360, and that was given to us with the assumption that that would have to cover all additional restrictions grants right up to March 2022. However, when the country went into its third and longer lockdown in January, the government announced a further extension to the additional restrictions grant provision, and a further 1.820951 million was made available, which gives us just over £6 million, just short of £6.1 million, to be able to distribute to businesses in the city. Having reviewed the evaluation criteria for the first round, there were about 750 businesses who were eligible, but we did have applications from some business areas where they can narrowly miss the existing criteria. So what this report is recommending is an extension of those criteria to bring in what we think will be a further somewhere in the region of about 250 further businesses, so that we'll be paying out 1,000 grants costing somewhere in the region of £1 million per month of lockdown. So those business areas where the existing criteria made them ineligible were those businesses where they were trading 75% of their time in York, but were not residents in the city. And I think that covers a lot of the comments from our two speakers today. It also covers accommodation businesses who do not benefit from the business rates related grant coverage, because they don't pay business rates, they actually pay council tax. So B&Bs and Airbnbs fall into that category. The report also extends the eligibility to cover all childcare businesses in reflection of the importance that our childcare sector has in supporting the rest of our economy. And so it proposes to bring smaller childcare businesses within the eligibility of the ARG, and propose that that nurseries are paid at the higher level of grant up to £3,000 per week. The grant also is now attempting to address those supply chain businesses who support those industries that have been closed down, but are not of and in themselves required to close, where their income has been impacted by 75% or more, to make those businesses eligible for a £25,000 one-off top-up grant, to be able to make sure that the vast majority of the businesses within our city who have been trying so assiduously to keep on trading in such difficult times are able to have some support during these very lean months. Para 25 sets out the updated estimate of the spend against the additional restrictions grant of 6.1 million. And in brief, if we are to continue in lockdown, then this grant will cover 3 months of lockdown and a further 2 months of tier 3 restrictions. Obviously, we do not know at this point how we will emerge from lockdown and at what point. This is just to note that although we are maintaining this grant must cover for a prolonged period of time, it cannot cover forever at this level. And if we go beyond that point, then we would need to make representations back to government for further support if lockdowns were to continue beyond that point. So grants have been processed for existing recipients who had the first round of ARG grant, and new applications will now be welcomed for all of those who were previously excluded from the criteria, and those will be processed as quickly as we can to ensure rapid deployment of funds. And taking it into consideration the points raised by Mr. Tu about quick distribution for cash flow, we have been one of the fastest to deploy ARG grant in the region and across the country in reflection of the fact that we know that these are critical times for our businesses. And just to address the point also raised in the questioning, that if we have businesses who were ineligible because of this and would be covered by these new criteria, those applications will be backdated to the start of the second lockdown, and recommend the report to you on that basis.
Thank you, Tracy. I'll open it up to questions and comments. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank officers for preparing this report very promptly in relation to the information from government. Not every authority will do it this way. Most will not bring these papers into a public decision session, but it's part of the way that we want to do things in York to ensure that this is done in as open a way as possible, but recognizing that businesses don't want the payment process to be slowed down by this process. So it's about achieving both transparency and rapid payment. And I put on record my thanks to officers for ensuring that there is rapid payment of the grants that have been awarded, but also ensuring that checks are taking place at the same time to ensure that only those that are eligible and legitimate are receiving public funding in order to keep them their businesses functioning. It's been important to utilise all the information coming forward, and I appreciate the work that officers have put into responding to all of the comments coming into the email address Economic Growth, which we've promoted through numerous meetings to capture all of those businesses that are missing out. Unfortunately, retrospective support to those sectors not covered in government guidance previously can be addressed, but we have very actively pressed the case for a number of businesses who had missed out from the very first grants, some sectors, and the business rate value greater than £51,000, which subsequent grants had been adjusted by Hmrc to include those. So we have done our best to support those. We recognise that for some sectors, insufficient resources have come forward, and there is a finite amount of funding here. And as Tracy has detailed in the table, item paragraph 25, it does allocate all the available resources, 6.1 million, and therefore if there is a longer period of restriction, that will require additional funding from government, but it also heightens the need to have a safe and long-term lifting based on the vaccination process. We are yet to see from government the mechanism by which this will happen. It was alluded to by various ministers at the weekend, but I think a structure by which those who want to lift lockdown very, very early and potentially risk a fourth lockdown, we need to get it right and ensure that this is done at the appropriate time, because businesses can't flick the switch to stock and then have to close again. I'm grateful to the two speakers for raising the issues of market traders. It's an issue that had to be addressed where people are based outside of the city, but it's as a consequence of prompt payment that we're able to understand the limited resources that we have and whether there was latitude to ensure that this description could be broadened, and I'm grateful for the opportunity today, and I would support the recommendations included. The supply chain issue is a key one, and a number of companies have contacted me and referred them to the economic growth team to ensure that their case has been included in this, and it's a tribute to the greater communication with businesses across the city that we're able to bring a paper like this today with the information included, and the experience of the micro grants scheme was very good, accepting that in many instances these are relatively small sums, but from a finite resource. And I'd like to thank the Federation of Small Businesses and Chamber of Commerce and other partners who have contributed to ensuring that this is as fair a scheme as can be devised in a short period of time. Normally we get much longer to come up with schemes, so I would very much support the recommendations before you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Waller. Councillor Craggill, I'm aware you're here for item 4, but I didn't know, was there anything you wanted to say while we're on this particular item?
Not really, except to support the fact that this additional money's come forward and it's enabled us to be more flexible and extend the reach of the scheme. And I would agree with the speakers that the market traders play a very important part in our city centre. So I'm glad that we can address that part of it along with the others.
Thank you, Councillor Craggill. I won't add much, but I think Councillor Waller's covered most of it from an economic point of view. I think the reason it sits in my particular portfolio is the end product, which is actually the paying out of the grants. So I think I'll reserve my comments to give my thanks to officers. I know David Walker is hiding in the background at the moment, ready to come forward for item 4, whose team has done a huge amount of work in terms of being able to get these grants out into people's bank accounts, as Tracy said, probably faster than nearly all local authorities in the country. And also in the economics team, Simon, who's not here today, and Tracy stepping in, who's actually been sort of running around crazily in the background trying to formulate the wording for this and the actual details of the scheme. That's not been particularly easy. There has been a variety of schemes. I think we could probably write a book on the number of different schemes and different processes we've had to go through since the start of lockdown, and there's like 11 different types of grants that we've had to process in that period. It's been hugely difficult and hugely challenging, but hugely important for those businesses in the city, and it really has been vital for a number of them to make sure that they're still able to trade and still able to keep afloat through what is a really difficult time. So I think with that, I'm happy to approve the recommendations at paragraphs 11 and 12 on page 3 of the relevant supplement. All those in favour of that one? Okay, so that one is approved. Thank you very much, Tracy. You're now free to go.
Thank you, Chair.
Yourself, Councillor Waller, unless you wish to stay in the background, you're more than welcome, obviously. So we'll then go on to item 4 on the agenda, which is financial inclusion and the welfare benefits update. And I'll go over to Pauline Stutchfield to introduce herself and the paper.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Pauline Stutchfield, Assistant Director for Customers and Digital Services. This report provides you with the financial inclusion and welfare benefits outturn report, not only for the midpoint of this financial year, but also for the last financial year. The 1920 report was due in July last year, but was delayed due to the impact of the pandemic on officers' work. It covers all of our welfare benefits landscape, including statistics and performance of the Council's financial inclusion, York Financial Assistance Scheme, and summarises other financial inclusion activity during 2021 and up to more recently. If it's okay, however, I'm going to focus on the April to September period of 2020, as I think it's really important to focus on the impact of coronavirus, and I'll also update on where we are currently, and David's here to answer any detailed questions. So the first section is very much focused on our current welfare provision, administered mainly through in terms of discretionary schemes through our York Financial Assistance Scheme, and that's been around a very long time now and has helped to support families for many years. As you will see from paragraph 7, to assist with the financial impact on York residents of the pandemic, emergency decisions were taken by the executive to allocate an additional £1 million of support, which is administered and managed through this scheme. And the criteria of the scheme was widened to include all residents finding themselves in financial hardship during the pandemic. Examples of spend against the fund are highlighted in table 3, but we've also used the hardship funding to support the community hubs, to pay for the free school meals vouchers during the October half term, and we're now funding the council tax hardship grant. Now, this was initially funded by £1 million supplied by the government, which didn't last long. It supported us from April to September and supplied council tax support residents with up to £150 towards their bills. And for many, this completely paid their bills off. But the money ran out in October, and yourselves agreed to support our residents for the rest of the year to avoid any inequality. We've already spent around 33,000 of that money, and we anticipate another 35,000 being spent before the end of the year. So the hardship fund is working very, very hard. And is supported by the work of our teams in community hubs, as well as those staff in the welfare teams and the staff on the ends of the phones who are answering either the emergency COVID line or our welfare benefits lines. An additional grant that we've had to administer from December was the winter support grant. In November, the government announced new funding of £416,729 over the winter period to distribute to families to assist them with food bills and with utility bills. This is new funding for food, energy and water bills and other associated costs. And you can see between paragraph 9 and 13 about the work that we've done to promote that scheme. We've now had 845 applications for the winter grant scheme, and we've paid over half of those. So getting money back into residents in the same way as we're trying to get the money into the businesses across the city is critically important. Around council tax, you heard me mention that the extra support that we've had to both from the government and the council to supplement council tax support. In terms of the number of claims that have increased, you can see that from March to August last year, almost 1,000 people were claiming council tax support, more than the previous period. So that's a significant increase in the number of claimants. As I mentioned, the extra funding has gone to good use, and the support has assisted over 6,600 residents with their council tax over the period of the pandemic. I'm not going to talk too much around discretionary housing payments because that's a normal welfare benefits scheme that is there to utilise and support residents across the city with housing costs. But when you read the housing section, we are doing more to promote that scheme because the funding is there to support our residents. If we move then to paragraph 22, I guess the big hitter around the impact of the pandemic is the increase in universal credit claimants. It's had a significant impact on jobs and those in work, but as you can see from table 8, numbers increased by around 57% from March to April 2020, and the numbers almost doubling by the end of September 2020. And this level is also reflected in the number of the Citizens Advice York Help to Claim service enquiries, and that's the service that supports people in making their universal credit claims. In the same April to September period, again, the number of inquiries doubled. That they very much focused their service during the pandemic on web inquiries and telephone lines, and were able to support many residents through that work. Can I just draw your attention to paragraph 25? Our welfare benefits officers team, a very small team of people who go out and visit people in their homes normally. They've obviously been conducting their work in other ways during the pandemic. But importantly, in 2019-20, they generated £3.2 million of extra benefits for our residents. And in the first 6 months of the current financial year, a further £1 million was generated. So a significant but small team working very hard with our residents at home. Paragraphs 26 to 33 is all about digital inclusion. And I'm really pleased to see that this aspect of our inclusion work is now quite a chunky part of our report. I think it really shows that digital accessibility to services, support and supplies has become a critical aspect of our work during the pandemic and will heavily feature in our future work and our future strategy that's under development. So if I can just take you through to paragraph 28, that describes how we have started to help people with the hardship funding that members have approved to actually give them access to a telephone or internet provision so that they can access services more easily. And the Digital City team in ICT have been really key to promoting this work. And the applications have been made via support workers, local area coordinators, etc. And by September, 30 mobile phone awards were made and 11 Wi-Fi hotspot dongles have been awarded, and that work continues now into the current lockdown. And you can see from paragraph 30, people have really appreciated that support. I can't move on without mentioning the recently launched York IT Reuse Scheme, which was developed as a result of joint work of organisations and services across the city, who identified a lack of digital access and were able to access funding to recycle donated ICT equipment for our residents across the city. Excuse me. I'll just finally mention that we have now come together in a strong partnership on digital inclusion led by ourselves and Explore York, and we've got a really strong network and agenda moving forward on this subject, and look forward to reporting that back to you in future sessions. If I can just point you to paragraphs 34 to 40, just a housing update really. They really have felt the impact of the pandemic, and residents in our council housing have struggled with some of the arrears impacts there. Housing officers have supported tenants and their families and communities through some really difficult times so far this year, and are helping tenants to claim discretionary housing payments, hardship payments through WIFAS, finding alternative accommodation, and encouraging payment by direct debit, for just a few examples. A housing hardship fund has been set up, £80,000 for tenants to apply for, and that builds on the existing support that's in place for our tenants. And finally, on housing, I'd just like to say that we have also been working with landlords across the city, and we've tried to promote that through our website, and we've written to all of our landlords, reminding them of the support available, and working with the York Residential Landlord Association as well. In terms of other budgets and work of the Financial Inclusion Steering Group, which is a cross-council and partnership group, they monitor on an ongoing basis grants awarded to local organisations to deliver projects that meet our objectives. It has an agreed base budget of £100,000 per year for approved grant schemes. And in terms of the two annexes to the report, Annex A outlines the outcomes from all the completed projects funded in 2019 and 20, and Annex B, the current projects that were funded in 2021. And I think paragraph 47 is really important in looking at the effects and outcomes of that funding. When you look at the significant statistics there, almost 1,900 residents were directly supported by these projects. For example, 241 people were helped with multiple debts valued at over £2 million, with almost £500,000 written off. 337 residents saw over £1 million of increased income through welfare benefits. There were 3,300 unique benefits issued, 300 of which were related to universal credit claims. 38 people found employment. I think that's really, really significant, and a reminder of what we can do when, in partnership with our partners across the city. 12 became volunteers and 30 entered education, training and study. So quite significant. So that I didn't mind focusing too much on 1920 there, because I think those statistics were so significant. In terms of, if I take you to paragraph 50, outcomes of projects grant funded in 2021, as I say, Annex B summarises those projects that are underway, and all partners responded swiftly and positively to the challenges of COVID-19, working collaboratively and innovatively to support our residents in the city, and they can continue to do so. So we're moving now to the period where we ask members whether we should continue to fund such schemes, and paragraph 53 asks you to consider whether we should continue with a grant scheme given these outcomes and outputs. We as officers see this as critical in delivering our financial inclusion objectives with the work of partners. And we think, taking into account the new pandemic and to secure transparency around the process, the recommended approach is that a new scheme consistent with previous years should be launched following this meeting. Criteria will be set and bids welcome to meet the impacts of financial hardship, which have been heightened and worsened during the pandemic. And as with last year's process, an external experienced person will chair the decision-making panel. Paragraphs at the end of the report briefly refer to the work of the community hubs, which I won't repeat because they've been reported elsewhere, but also the integrated assessment approach, which looks at a complete approach to review a person's need for support, not just financial support. So to then take you back to the recommendations, members are asked to note all the work that has taken place across the last 2 years, and the progress that we've made, and approve the commencement of the 21-22 financial inclusion grant scheme as described in paragraph 54. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Pauline. I'll open that up to questions and comments. Councillor Crackhill.
Thank you, Chair. I don't really have any specific questions. It's a very comprehensive report, and I'd like to thank officers for that. I've got a few comments, if that's okay. I do think it's very helpful to bring together in a single report all the different aspects of our support for individuals and households who are struggling financially. And whilst the report on the 1920 outturn makes it very clear that people in York were struggling financially prior to COVID, I think the paper also really underlines how many more people are now being affected financially because of COVID. I think for me, there's a couple of key things that stand out in terms of the council's approach as you set out in the paper. One is that we are doing everything that we can to respond to immediate needs and to support people in the immediate crisis. Just a few examples in the paper being our support for the provision of free school meals, our topping up of the COVID hardship grant, as you mentioned, Pauline, through the council tax support, extending the council tax support scheme, and the additional hardship fund you mentioned for housing tenants. I do think, it being also part of my portfolio, the growing impact on council housing rent arrears is obviously a serious challenge, but I would also like to commend the work that's been done by housing staff, working with tenants, that slowed the projected increase down at least a bit, and means the current deficit is significantly less than originally forecast at the moment. I think that this kind of approach also reflects the fact that, as well as tackling the immediate crisis, we are also working to help residents build on their own strengths and help local communities to be as supportive and resilient as possible for the future, for example, through the community hubs. The second standout for me is, Pauline mentioned quite a bit from the paper, is that partnership working is absolutely crucial, and there's a lot of partnership working going on. Explained in the paper, as you said, for example, through the digital inclusion schemes. The financial inclusion steering group is an important part of that partnership working, and that includes the grants we're able to provide to support organisations such as Citizens Advice and all the others that are set out in the appendices. So in that respect, I do think that the recommendation at paragraph 2 is the right decision in the current circumstances, to open the scheme again for applications on a similar basis to previous years. That means that organisations that are currently very focused on meeting COVID-related pressures can apply to, in a sense, effectively roll forward similar schemes if that's what they think is appropriate, but it doesn't exclude innovation and amendments to schemes if that's what people want to put in. So just finally, I just wanted to add that I don't think any of this that we've set out is to underestimate the extent of the current challenge, or to assume that we can currently help everyone to the degree that we might like to. We really need more government intervention and support to do that. For example, I would like to see an unconditional basic income. I think it would be really helpful. But I also think sometimes people don't realise what help is available, and that there can be more options than they think. So I just really urge people to get in touch with the council or another organisation such as Citizens Advice as early as possible to check out what help is available. So I am happy to support the recommendations at paragraph 2.
Thank you, Councillor Craghill. I'll just add some brief comments. I think, to paraphrase Monty Python, as local councillors, we often get asked frequently, well, what is it the council does for us? And I think both the paper beforehand and this paper, even though just a very small part, and this is just in many ways a section that Pauline and David deal with, shows a huge plethora of work that is actually going on in the council to support both residents and businesses. And it really is stark to see it laid out there. I think the first thing I flagged, similarly to Councillor Craghill, was the speed with which we were able to respond to the pandemic and step in where the government had not really helped us. So that £1 million of additional investment, getting the free school meals agreement in straight away, the council tax support when that ran out, we really have been able to react quickly where the government has not stepped in, to be able to cover some of those gaps and make sure, at least for residents, that hasn't been as harshly felt as it perhaps could have been. The paper does allude, I think, one of those key things that people often overlook is the amount of extra income that's been brought into the city, and that's not just to support residents, that actually helps to support our local businesses, and those shambles traders, etc., that we were talking about in the previous paper are the ones that benefit. So I think some of the numbers that were mentioned there, the welfare benefits unit bringing in an extra £3 million last year into residents' pockets. That's not just helping them in terms of paying their bills, etc. That's money that they're contributing as well to the local economy, and that was already at £1 million again, I think, up to September of last year, as included in the report. On top of that as well, I think it's alluded to in the financial inclusion grants, that's another £1 million of extra income that's been brought in to help support residents and help to support our local economy. Annex on paragraph 47, Pauline already touched on, that was a paragraph that did also leap out to me in terms of some of those headline numbers and some of that work that's gone on with the value of getting people back into employment and back into education or volunteering. Really, really crucial support that's being given. Digital inclusion, I remember having those long conversations with both Councillor Craghill and yourself, probably going back 18 months when we first started emphasising that as a key point, and it's fantastic to see some of that coming through now and some of the work that's happening. But declaring an interest as someone who's currently broadcasting via a Wi-Fi dongle, because my system literally can't cope with having 2 school children on Zoom classes at the same time as trying to conduct a work meeting on Zoom at the moment. Digital inclusion, I think, is now broadened out far more than people could ever have imagined. At the time we were initially talking, I think probably the focus was around people who don't have access to the internet at all, or perhaps only have access to their phones. I think what we're now seeing is the importance going forward of having high speed broadband, of having the right devices, having the right number of devices, because at the moment, if you're homeschooling 2 or 3 children and trying to work at a low-level internet connection on one device just simply isn't enough. So I think that whole scope of digital inclusion is much bigger and much more of a challenge than we ever probably thought that it was. In terms of the bid process, I think Councillor Craghill touched on this a little bit herself. Yes, I think it's right to open it up, and that's not in any way to devalue some of the work that's been done by those who've been successful in the past. They have delivered fantastic outcomes, as we've seen in this report, but one of the key strengths we have in this city is having a strong and a creative voluntary sector. And I think what we're trying to do with this is to continue to stimulate that and continue to provide innovation and challenge to make sure that the sector as a whole remains strong and not just certain parts of that particular sector. And then I think my final comment is an old bugbear I have around paragraph 58, which I do fully support the initiatives that we're doing. And it's absolutely right that we're using that particular hook of that first contact with people. I think there was a scheme a long time ago called Make Every Contact Matter. It's absolutely right to use that hook of people first approaching us to get them, link them in, and then link them into the plethora of things that the council is doing. Discussed this with my IT colleagues in the past. I think what's really important to us is what that hook is. This is one particular hook in terms of people contacting us with support, but I think how we as local authority and drawing on work that's been done in areas like Tel Aviv can really find new and innovative ways to hook people in. Not everybody first turns to the council website or the council helpline as their first port of call for everything. And I think the more you can start to expand that, the more we can develop either IT solutions or phone solutions that really link people in as the council as a key conduit to everything in the city. That will link us into more people. And if we could get to a point where everybody in the city was accessing a single portal of contact for the council and then through everything, that would really allow us to speed up everything we do, from pothole repairs to council tax support to housing and planning, etc. And it's how we really get that innovative approach to be the council being that sort of central point and signposting people through. So I think with those comments, I'm happy to agree the recommendations as Councillor Craghill suggested at paragraph 2 on page 1 of one of the supplements. Are we happy with that, Councillor Craghill? I will thank Pauline and Polly, you hanging on for the next item.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you, David, for your time. Councillor Craghill, again, you're more than happy to stay and you're more than happy to go. I will not be offended if you don't stay for this particular item.
I may leave. Health and safety is very, very important, but I don't think I need to stay. So thank you.
Very carefully worded, Councillor Craghill.
Yes.
So with that introduction, I shall go straight to item 5. Thank you to Stuart for his patience as being the first person logged into the call and the last person called. I'll go to item 5, which is the health and safety update.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. As Councillor Craghill says, health and safety for staff is critically important. And of course, our health and safety policy does cover our residents that come into contact with our services and our contractors as well. And for the same reason as the last report was an 18-month report, this report is an 18-month report. And again, with a focus on the period from sort of March, April last year through to September is critically important, as you see that the work of the Health and Safety Service was very much in support of the COVID preparations, COVID secure arrangements that the council was undertaking. So there are a couple of elements to this report. One is my report as client officer for York for the shared service, and I summarise in the report in terms of paragraph 8 and 9 and the table that's in there around my judgment for the performance of the service. And as you can see, they get a clean bill of health, a strong service working fully to the benefit of the council. And I assess this in consultation with our partners in North Yorkshire County Council, and I meet with them regularly, and it is an excellent service on the council's behalf. In addition, the report attached is Stuart's report, and I will let him introduce that. That summarises the council's health and safety performance for the period, the key areas of the team's work, accident and incident statistics, including the serious RIDDOR reportable statistics, and a look forward to the key areas of work planned for 2021, including the priorities of the Health and Safety Executive. So on that note, Chair, can I ask Stuart to introduce his report and then bring you back at the end to the recommendations at paragraph 3. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Stuart Langston, so I head up both the Health and Safety team as it's a shared service across North Yorkshire County Council and City of York Council. I head the two up. This report, as Pauline outlines, is 18 months of work. For the purpose of the annual report, I could just cover some of the key themes. And if I start off, just some of the things you need to know regarding what seems like a lifetime ago, before the pandemic, is the priority that the team was really strengthening the support that we give on some of our key construction projects, particularly to ensure that health and safety was designed out of these projects where we could. So when they become operational, we're not very reactive to once services start using these buildings and yet have a number of issues. So that's been really positive, and it's good to see that even throughout this pandemic, some projects have continued, they've come to conclusion, and they're working effectively. Examples like the Beehive and the other example I use in there is Guildhall. Some of these construction projects are very complex and have a lot of sort of resources in them and have some unusual construction methods. And one of the areas of support that we continue to provide is also monitoring on site. So in addition, also ensuring that contractors within the city are working the standards we expect, which obviously while schools and things like that open is essential. However, I don't think any report like this can not make reference to the impact of the pandemic, and generally it's just absorbed an awful lot of health and safety resource. As you might imagine, the guidance has been changing rapidly. You've picked that up on the national news, and my team have been working in partnership with school leaders, and that's been a very emotive subject throughout the pandemic about what health and safety controls should be in schools. That's working with school leaders, trade union reps to basically come up with very sensible but achievable risk management within schools, because we appreciate it is a motive of keeping schools open, and you've already alluded to the issues associated with pupils being at home, obviously safe from the COVID, but then that creates other issues as regards their safeguarding arrangements. So my team are trying to walk that tightrope that is government guidance to ensure that we continue to support that. And I do know that's been widely received both by head teachers and the staff working in there. They do really appreciate, and that not only involves sitting in offices sending guidance out, that involves my team being on the ground discussing how those controls might be implemented. And we've worked closely with our public health colleagues to make sure that the recommendations are proportionate. It goes without saying, on any report such as this, we have to cover the key accident incident reporting. Now, it has to come with a big dose of health check, this, as you might imagine, as I've just said, that the operational practices of the service as we provide across the city have fundamentally changed as a result of the pandemic. We're under the third lockdown now, which has obviously had a significant impact on what services are delivered and how are they delivered. So the one thing I do want to pick out on the incident reporting, because it's been a theme, if you look back at the April 19, March 20 period, child aggression still remains very high, as does physical, verbal abuse. Our staff do face this on a regular basis. And one of the things that we've been working with across the organisation is that it doesn't seem as part of the job if you have to put up with this an awful lot. Child aggression is particularly challenging because we deal with very vulnerable children who may have very specific needs, so do need a lot of care and support of our staff. And we do review our management strategies to try and support those who in that situation. but sometimes it's simply unavoidable, but that doesn't mean that it becomes part of the job. We do review these cases to see if there is other measures, can't say them, put my teeth back in, measures that we could implement to try and improve those things. And moving on, just to pick that issue up, because it still remains a theme, even though the pandemic's there, that child aggression still remains our top cause of incident reported, shows that our staff are continuing to report those incidents, still working with our managers to try and look at ways we can mitigate that. And if I just move on to RIDDORs, because the RIDDORs, we've had a significant reduction, which is really positive. However, I've already said, is that a long-term trend, which were really great, or is it more just the how we've reallocated resources to deal with the pandemic? However, I will pick up in just paragraph 17, is that one of those RIDDORs, so this theme of we've got a lot of violence and incidents that do get reported by staff who are facing these, is one resulted in very serious assault. And what I would like to say is publicly, and I would appreciate if you could endorse, Councillor, is that we've previously said we do not take those things lightly. Where we do need involve, we will involve the police, is that we expect all our staff to be treated with respect, and that's something we implore the public in particular. Is the pandemic and prior, some of the roles that our council staff do are emotive and are challenging, and our staff do try and remain respectful through there, and we just expect the same in return of our communities. And we really do appreciate that, particularly when people are in very serious financial difficulty, which is what's caused the pandemic. So that is the accident stats. And then just moving on to the final bit of, it's all been pandemic over the last 12 months, but that doesn't mean the rest of the world stopped. And probably the biggest issue prior to the pandemic, and will be starting to really come to the fore in the next few months, is the Grenfell tragedy. It hasn't gone away. The government are revising their fire safety legislation with a fire safety bill, and we expect that to gain royal assent over the next 12 months. Now, whilst this predominantly is aimed at tower blocks and over the 18 metres, we do expect, once that covers theirs, a lot of the guidance and a lot of the arrangements then are broadened out to cover the rest of the sector. In particular, the competence of staff to undertake fire risk assessments, which in York that's our own staff, our own health and safety staff undertake that on our behalf. Where we need support, we bring in specialists, but we expect that to have a significant impact going forward. And similarly, we expect the control measures that are expected as of normal to also be amended. And we currently reviewing the fire safety management strategy, just so we're ready for whatever they may look like going forward. So we do expect to continue with the pandemic work for some time now, but we do expect, as the vaccine rolls out, that we need to move to more other areas of risk, and fire and construction continue to be two specific areas that we want to make sure that we continue to monitor. So that is the summary of the report as I see it. I don't know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Stuart. Just a couple of questions from me. I will reflect at the bottom of page 17, as the old commentary from the Crucible went. I couldn't, in a black and white piece of paper, clearly see what the pie chart differences were. So I just think maybe in the future there's a way we can present that slightly easier. It's the RIDDOR pie chart, which is on my page, is a collection of greys. So I couldn't really...
yes. So when it's printed black and white, you can't really see, yeah.
Where the difference is in.
Yeah.
You'd alluded to table 1 on page 16.
Yep.
There did seem to be a particular switch. Is there any particular reasons around that? So we see the verbal and violent aggression was down, but the child aggression was up. Was there any indication?
I think that's a willingness to report. I think when you get those, they've always been a consistent area of concern, but I think in the past, and I do believe this, is people saw it as part of the job because they're dealing with people with challenging behaviour a lot, And one of the things we have done we introduced it a few years ago with there was Councillor Waller at the time in the portfolio. We actually put it as one of our items in the corporate health and safety policy that we did expect violence and aggression to be reported, is some of the frontline roles, and particularly children's social care was one of them, where it was classed as part of the job. You're dealing with a challenging pupil and they act out. So this is examples of nip you or scratch you when they've got severe mental health issues and things like that. Is we've asked people to notify, so managers get the opportunity to understand if that's a number or a significant number and look at behavioural management strategies, as opposed to just write them off and not report them because it was only a minor scratch. And we really have been pushing that. It is not business as usual, challenge it, and then we can look at see if there's alternatives we could do. It could be simple that the chair they've got is uncomfortable, so they want to make people aware that it's uncomfortable, and their way of acting out is to nip somebody. But if somebody then reviews why that cause was, we could maybe do something about it.
Yeah, thanks for that. And then was moving over to the top of page 17, table 2, and it's probably COVID. Obviously, the physical violence aggression isn't present in that table for the April September period. Is that primarily because staff aren't currently going out and visiting those individuals? Yeah,
things like parking enforcement and things like that. You remember there was a big period of free parking at the first lockdown, and that's the sort of thing that long-term. I think this is just a blip because of COVID. If it was normal, I think we'd see that much appear. But it'd be great if that trend continued. But I think it's just been affected by COVID, I'm afraid.
And then the transfer for those two tables. So in the 1920 period, we had impact with stationary / moving object. Yep. On the new table, has that been separated out into two different measures?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do in some cases, because they're very close, we amalgamate just for simplicity, because you'd end up with things like verbal and violent assault in different columns. What we also seen in there is, if you look at RTAs, is again getting people to report those near misses. So when they're clipping wing mirrors and things like that, is we trying to encourage that sort of reporting that maybe wasn't once time, unless it resulted in real serious injury. So that's what I mean. Is you take the stats on their own, what do they telling you? But when the themes and the longer term themes are, at the moment, I think we're getting more reported because we've been working on so long.
Reports to get some kind of linear graphs in there as well, so we could actually start to see where things are going. And then the last one I had for you was around paragraph 6, I think it was. So it's again around that COVID thing with the high number of people working from home. How difficult is that? I mean, I've done a monitor assessment sort of once in my period, but I do have genuine concerns about probably back pain and other ergonomic issues around people who are trying to work around kitchen tables, sofas, wherever they possibly can. How are we addressing that? What are the challenges? And is there more support we can give to you?
Yes, so I think we've just rolled out the new software, as I mentioned in there, BSafe. It's been coming for a while, and one of the things that allows that to do is online DSE assessment, and it's based on action and outcome. Because we do imagine the first part of the pandemic, and it was already alluded to in earlier reports, is it's all been getting the IT out. Now, and everybody thought the pandemic would be reasonably short, and then we move on. The mood of the whole organisation has been, how do we support this type of work in the much longer term? And where the target has been with all individual managers is work through an individual risk assessment process. So people do their own DSE. We don't necessarily want to tell people how to live in their own homes, but in the same token is it allows that early identification of those chronic conditions. Because as you might imagine, I'm sitting on a dining chair at the moment, is sitting in a dining chair for a couple of hours is fine. Very quickly that gets to your low back pain if you're working 8 hours. If you do that week in, week out, that becomes far more significant. And that's where we're moving to at the moment. We're doing it, those individuals have identified early of, I've got a pre-existing condition, work with occupational health, see what solutions we might be able to achieve. And I do know people have got proper office chairs and things like that, which solves them. But the more, as you say, routine person who it's been okay for a while, but now it's going into 6 months, maybe 8 months, is what support are they going to get in the long term. And whilst some people haven't got the homes to build home offices in, we're starting to look at the sort of equipment we could provide. Examples being laptop risers, so you're at eye level. It can make a significant difference to avoid shoulder and upper back pain, and it's relatively low cost to introduce. So that's where we're moving in, to be honest, Councillor, as how do we support people much longer term so that can continue to work effectively.
Pauline, I think you've got your hand up.
Yes, I'd just add to that the numbers of DSE assessments, which is the display screen risk assessments, are monitored by the Joint Health and Safety Committee, and the role of the Joint Health and Safety Committee is covered in paragraph 5 of the current covering report, and that's where we work jointly with the trade unions to mitigate risks for our staff. And so on every agenda we have coronavirus impacts, and we also monitor the DSE assessments. And the benefit of the new system is that we've got real-time reporting. And so every meeting we can monitor every team in the council, and we can see what the issues are. Some of the things I've been finding from my staff doing DSE assessments is people are trying to cope with what they've got, but they don't have to. So what we've been trying to do through frequent staff emails is highlight what support people can get and the equipment that they can get to support them throughout this. And you don't have to put up with what, you know, some people are working, as you say, in very difficult circumstances. And unfortunately, with children being at home now as well, it may be that their DSE assessment has now changed because the children have now got the desk space or the table space and the chair you would have been working on. So again, people might be working in very different circumstances. So we're keeping, as a Joint Health and Safety Committee, we're keeping an eye on that.
Are we doing any sort of qualitative dive in there, Pauline, to actually just picking individual members of staff and getting stories, rather than, because obviously the number of assessments, etc., tells you one thing, but actually hearing some of those first-hand experiences might help in terms of how we deliver it?
We hear it because we do a staff survey. And we've just had a staff survey before Christmas, and I've certainly seen the comments that relate to some of the circumstances that people work in, and it indicates to us that we're not getting some of our communications right, so we need to keep repeating what support is there for staff. But it would be good to use some examples in that. I think it's a good idea, but we are listening to staff and we will take action.
Okay, and then my last question, I think, was probably for you, Pauline, was around about paragraph 20. So obviously welcoming the work Stuart and his team have been doing around some of our larger major project schemes. Do we do any kind of cost recovery from capital in terms of the work we're doing with those?
Stuart, you might be in a better place to cover this. I mean, the work of the health and safety team in capital projects is funded from those capital projects. But in terms of whether we've had any return from those, I'm not sure. Certainly, you've seen the benefits, haven't you, Stuart, of the first couple of years of working in that way. And because we are required to build in health and safety to every construction project now, that support can be bought from council teams on a cost-effective basis. So, for example, we've helped Fulford Parish Council with their health and safety support, building that in with the work that they're doing at the cemetery, for example. So, technically, I can't answer your question, but yes, we've certainly seen those benefits, haven't we, Stuart?
Yeah, so I can just say that the time my officers spend on that is coded back to those specific projects. As far as the return on investment on the time they spend, it's very difficult to quantify that, because this is quite often, this is not to criticise colleagues, is designers think of how the feasibility, how to build it. They don't necessarily have the practical experience my team have of what the operational services might be like when they get into those buildings, and then they ask for our advice post and all the works have been done. So yes, to answer your question, we do code it back to those individual projects as far as the return on investment. it's very difficult to justify.
Okay. That's all the questions I had. So I think just in terms of welcoming that report, look forward to the next one and some of those linear trends coming forward so we can
I'll pick that up. Yeah,
fully endorse what you said earlier, Stuart. It's not acceptable to treat council staff in that way, and to reinforce that message. Really happy to help you in any way with that one.
Thanks. No, that's good.
So with that one, I'm happy to agree the recommendations, the only ones that were in the agenda that aren't in the supplement, but on page 7, paragraph 3A, B and C. Okay, with that, I have no further urgent business other than the urgent business that we took at the beginning of the meeting. So thank you to all the officers for your time and happy to declare the meeting closed.
Thank you.